Dr. Sharif Abdullah offers a unique, hopeful, and visionary perspective on the persistent challenges of our time. His perspective is shaped by his urban upbringing of poverty and violence, his Ivy League education, and his work with impacted communities in America and in 45 countries around the world. His spiritual outlook is rooted in the consciousness of dozens of religions, faith traditions, and spiritual practices. Sharif offers this unique viewpoint, helping us chart a course that explains where we've been, where we are now, and how we get to a positive future that works for all living beings.
Hello, Sharif here. And today we're going to talk about the issues that are facing us as a society and us as a global human community. I'm going to share some slides with you, but for those of you who are listening to this on podcast, I'm going to read all the slides so you don't have to worry about missing anything. Before we get started, I guess I should also say I have a slightly different format here because I'm going to be sharing my screen with you. Hope that doesn't cause anybody any problems. Before I share any of this with you, I want to say something. I'm going to share it with you before I start, and then I'm going to share it with you again after we've started. And that is really simply that these issues don't have a solution within the framework of left-leaning thinking. These issues don't have solutions within the framework of right-leaning thinking. In order for us to resolve these crises, and these are the crises that can crack our entire society. In order to resolve these, in order to develop a vision for these, we've got to leave that dichotomy completely. I have lots of friends on the left, and I have quite a few friends on the right who will tolerate me. And when I talk like this, it's like, oh yes, Sharif, there he goes again. But yes, he's a really nice guy. And maybe one of these days, he's going to come over to our side and figure out what's going on. I will invite you to think differently. You remember what Albert Einstein said about our thinking, that we have to develop a way of thinking that wasn't the level of thinking that created the problem in the first place. I'm inviting you to that level. And I'm inviting you to that level by looking at the world in two different ways. The first way, and let me share my screen on this, is looking at the world from the point of view of the 12 global challenges. And what we're looking at with regard to that is something that I developed with Dr. A.T. Aryaratne in Sri Lanka. The 12 issues that are the center part of that every human being on the planet is facing, to some extent or another, rich or poor, whatever color you may be, whatever religion you are, one of these 12 global challenges will be affecting you. On top of that, this is something I've been developing recently, which I'm calling the 12 Intractable Issues here in the United States. These are the issues that get worse and worse, regardless of what political party is in power, regardless of what their platforms are, etc. These things go on and on. They can't be resolved in the context of a two-party system when the two parties are trying to maintain a status quo, and this is what the status quo looks like. So let me walk through these a little bit slower. In the upcoming weeks, I'm going to be taking parts of this and developing it a little bit more so you can see what we're talking about, and then you can see the solutions. But let's go back to the situation with regard to the 12 intractable issues. So the first issue I want to talk about is poverty and homelessness. if you've walked out on our streets and any time in the last few years, you see people sleeping in the streets. Back at the Great Depression, the they called these encampments of human beings Hoovervilles. I don't know why they didn't call them Trumpvilles or Obamavilles. They may call them Bidenvilles, but they're all over the place. And none of our leaders seem to be able to articulate the depth that the problem goes. They think that the problem, a person sleeping in a tent has a problem with getting a roof over their head, when that's a fraction of the problem that that's present. Another issue that is right along the same lines is drugs and alcohol. You hear people on one side saying, "Oh, those people are mentally ill; they're all drugged and alcoholic," and you hear other people saying, "No, there's a more complex issue." The bottom line on all of this is that's a convenient excuse to not consider the complexity of the issue that's in front of us. On the next level is what I'm calling military waste. That every single problem we have in our society can be resolved with the resources that our military wastes in an average day. Now, I'm not even getting into should we even have a military the size that we've got, or should we have a military that's pointing in the directions that we've got. I'm just talking about the sheer blatant waste that's in the system. We lack means to even measure what the waste is. The next level is our failing economy. Now, I'm reading every day about how the Dow averages are going up and higher, and rich people are celebrating, and people with 401ks are celebrating, and we forget that this is a sign of the collapse. This is exactly what happened in the 1920s and 30s, right before the economy fell straight through the floor. Those of us who are paying attention recognize what's going on, and it's time for all of us to pay attention and start looking for some alternatives. The next level is corporate greed. Along with watching the Dow go straight through the roof, we're watching these hyper-sized global corporations that are tracking record profits unheard of in any times, having more wealth than we can even comprehend, and working diligently, working hard to increase that, while there are human beings sleeping on our streets. At the next level is political stagnation and paralysis. That is our challenge, and we just finished witnessing 4 years of a particular type of paralysis, and that replaced 4 years of a different type of paralysis, and we're about to go into 4 years of yet another type of paralysis. And at some point in time, those of us who are paying attention recognize we need to have we need to create alternatives to this, model those alternatives, and move forward on those alternatives while that system is collapsing. Next is social separation and alienation. We see this on our headlines all the time. We see this here in Portland on our streets all the time, where we seem to have lost the capacity to talk to each other. We seem to have lost the capacity to talk with each other. We seem to have gotten to a point where we can't even function together, and we look at each other as though each of us, as the other is insane, when that's not the problem. The problem is, what are the tools we're looking at to look at each other, and how do we develop the tools to see with a single eye are very simple but are very profound problems, and to see those problems in such a way that we also see the solutions. Our next intractable issue is what I'm calling immoral behavior. In other societies, we talk about corruption. The problem with that language is we begin to think it doesn't apply to me, it doesn't apply to my friends, it doesn't apply to my party, it doesn't apply to my side of this equation. And it definitely does. We're in a society where our system becomes so corrupt, we just legalize the corruption and let our congressmen and let our senators take as much money as they want. We let them, as long as there's a line on the tax form that they fill out to do that. We encourage immoral, toxic, ecologically disastrous behaviors as long as they fill out the right form, as long as they satisfy these regulations. And we need to start looking beyond that. Next is our lack of vision. There's a saying in Proverbs in the Bible, when there is no vision, the people perish, and that's exactly what's happening. We are not in control of our own destiny. Our destiny is controlled by technology, not by us saying this is the right way to go. That has to change, and we are the ones to hold that vision of our society. We're awash in violence. That's at the global level. We're involved in way more wars than we should be, and that number's not going down; it's going up. On regional and local levels, we're involved in violence, and we're involved in violence in our own hearts. Our issues of mental and spiritual disorders. If you live in a city like mine, you can see people who are not able to function in society anymore, and their lack of functioning, is increasing. I see people all the time talking to themselves, screaming to themselves. And if you ask them what's wrong, they would say, if they could say anything, I don't know. I don't know what's wrong. Well, I know what's wrong. You live in a society that doesn't need you. You live in a society that has no vision, and you live in a society where apparently nobody cares about you. That's a recipe for the kinds of mental and social and spiritual disorders we can see by just looking right outside our windows. And our last one I'm saying is climate change. But this is kind of a strange issue. We're watching all sorts of different weather conditions coming up. We're watching all sorts of different, like the fires that we just had down in California and here in Oregon, at a worse and worse level. But if you're not in the fire, if you're not in the flood, if you're not in the drought, you then say, oh, it's not that bad. Everything's okay. So these issues are the things that the left has no response to. The right has no response to. The response has to be comprehensive, and the response has to be the thing that encourages us to get to the world that works for all living beings. That's our challenge. More on that challenge coming up. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.
You are invited to participate in the discussions and activities that will define a positive future for all. We are at the cusp of the expansion of our human consciousness, beyond the limitations of our past. Together, we can envision a world that embraces our human potential. Together, we can create a world that can truly work for all living beings.